Okay, so this is the OpenChain AI study group. It's the Asia Sync call. Though today on the live call, we are distinctly missing our Asian participants. It is one of those times a lot of people are en route to the US. There's a couple of events happening there. We have the LF Legal Summit and we have the LF Member Summit running next week, Monday through Thursday, I believe. But let's hop right in. We're recording this and it will be available as a summary of activity for our community around the world. Key thing is the Asia Sync is summarizing the bigger workshop that happens at the beginning of each month. So we'll have a look at what they did and what that means. First thing, of course, antitrust policy notice. We show this at the beginning of every meeting. If you want to read the full antitrust policy, you will find it on the Linux Foundation website. And if you're from one of our member companies, you can ask questions of our counsel, Andrew Updegrove. The agenda today is very simple. Overview of the workshop earlier in the month, and then a little bit about the board review of the request to form a work group. So there was a request formulated based on the workshop earlier in the month to turn this study group into a work group, to switch from exploring a problem into doing something practical to assist with it. Let's talk about what happened earlier in the month. There was a meeting which focused on, and I'm going to open the hyperlink, focused on talking about how do we deal with AI compliance in the supply chain. There's a link to a document online, which I will briefly switch to. This document contains ideas of how various ISO standards, various approaches could, could assist with the idea of compliance around AI bill of materials. So if you're dealing with compliance matters in AI in the context of bill of materials, what type of processes, what type of policy, what type of training would enable an organization to address that action most effectively? The document is quite extensive and it's had input from people from everything from startups to large entities. It's beginning to look like it identifies a lot of process points that could be useful if you're thinking of AI compliance and bill of materials. Because the document is substantially ready in terms of covering the core topic, the work group suggested that it's time to move into turning the Scratchpad into an actual guide. The goal, as we understand it, would be a guide for cross-industry management of AI compliance, bill of materials in the supply chain. This document is freely available. It will be linked, of course, in the recording of this meeting. It will be easily linked on the web page referencing the recording. In the context of our particular meeting, the key thing was people discussed this document becoming a guide, and that would require this study group to become a work group. And the conclusion was that's a reasonable idea. And that's where we move into the second part of this meeting, the board review of the request to form a work group. OpenChain has a strict review process, a formalized method of doing this. We've had it in place for a while. You can find it on our website, and I'll just switch to it very, very briefly. On our website, under the FAQ, and you'll see there's a process for forming new work groups. And in principle, a study group is what turns into a work group. And a work group should be based on taking the conversation of a study group and implementing a solution. Proposal needs to explain the new group to the board, saying this is why we should have a work group. It needs to explain how the work group will help with the OpenChain project charter. And then the board will spend time reviewing it, approximately 2 weeks. Matthew, one of our co-chairs, prepared a proposal and it went to the board. The full text is here. Long story short, the proposal is designed to explain the rationale for working on this topic. This rationale will be reviewed by the board. It's under review as we speak. And it will therefore be something that we will get approval or not to transition into a work group. The board is actually meeting on the 18th of November, which means that the 17th was put as a provisional deadline for them to provide feedback. And we, as participants in the AI study group, should therefore have feedback by the 19th of November. I wanted to show you what is being shown to the board. And what the board is going to see is something like this. An overview of what's going on, capturing the fact that there's a request to transfer into a work group, and a summary of how that might happen, for instance, an AI compliance bill of material management guide. And we've had some feedback, for instance, from Osaki-san at Fujitsu, that practical work is happening in places like ISO 4201, and that means that whatever this potential work group does, it should take consideration of integration with existing AI management systems. So all very, very dry language, but the process is being followed to convert from the study group into the work group. That's based on what happened earlier this month and the previous work. And we should have provisional feedback 19th of November or there. So, any questions about that? Utter
Yeah.
silence means agreement.
Yeah, no, absolutely agreement. I do have a lot of questions, but so the process is the board is considering it, or they've approved it.
Considering.
They're
Matthew
considering it.
wrote an email to them with a proposal,
Yeah,
and they'll
okay.
read that proposal and consider whether it fits in what we're meant to do.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That sounds great. I mean, it sounds a really important thing to have. I think the question going through my head is just the focus of the work group
Yes.
around. Is it around bill of materials, or is it around everything AI related that is relevant to OpenChain? So it's
The
uh,
initial thing would be a scoped activity.
right,
And
right.
in that case, we're looking at what's currently being shown to the board is, I'm just pulling it up again, just for reference for those following.
Yeah,
I need a moment. Where is it? Oh, there we go. So the current document, the Scratchpad, the primary text in it is very much focused on AI bill of material management in the supply chain and what
yeah,
parts of our existing compliance approach match that and what does not match it. And in quite a dry way, purposefully, they found a bunch of ISO standards that seem relevant. And then they started writing out the process points regarding compliance. And essentially, this goes down to compliance AI bill of materials. So you're trying to use an AI bill of materials to do things like check for license obligations.
yeah. No, thanks, Shane. It was more than what was in the name. So it's just sort of I'm familiar with the document. It's just having bill of materials in the name
Yep.
may sort of, create the impression that we're only focusing on bill of materials, but the study group did do the full walk through all the aspects of 5230. So that's just a
Yep.
perception question in my head. Yeah.
Right. And I think um, what they're this is not intended to be the final title, but what they're trying to do back and forth a little bit on the discussion and the proposal is say that whatever the first output is, it should be very narrowly scoped and very clear. And if it's about, let's say, compliance, and it involves a lot of bill of materials, as it seems to, then an AI compliance bill of material management guide and executing on that might be a good first step. It doesn't preclude other work. It would just be a case of here's what we've got permission to do, here's what we'll execute on.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, it's all excellent. Just looking a step or two ahead. Yeah,
Yeah.
that will
And
be
then
good.
if the guide worked out well, it would be a case of saying to the
Yeah.
board, look how good this is.
Mm. Yeah.
Problem B. Off we go. And ultimately, for those, especially those watching the recording and thinking, why all this dry process? Why? There is a reasonable reason for it, and that comes down to processes are there to do the study groups, the work groups, and all of that. And the simple reason is that not everything we do, but some things we do become ISO standards. And hypothetically, and this isn't the proposed goal of the work group, but hypothetically, if this study group becomes a work group, and over time, this work group, which was, agreed how it would work with our project charter and so on, if it created a fantastic solution for the market that moved from a guide into a specification into an ISO standard, we have to be in a position in 10 years for someone to say, how did this start? How did it escalate? And who gave permission as they audit what went on? And that's why we have all these dry processes. And that's ultimately why it's baby steps, which which is get permission, become a work group for outcomes, have a scoped activity, see how it goes, see how the market responds, and build from there. Just as a side note, because the document that this work group has been working on looks substantially complete, it has a lot of stuff done. It looks like the first version of an AI compliance bill of material management guide, or whatever it's called, might not take that long to make, and therefore initial market reaction might be relatively quick to get. And this study group, or this new work group, could iterate and say we'd like to build something new. And that process would be pretty straightforward. It would just involve our chairs going and having a chat with the board to make sure they're comfortable. Make sense?
Uh,
Right.
yeah.
That's great. By the way, Stephen, I know that this type of thing is adjacent to, but it sounds like at some point down the line, if this is maturing and if it's building out, it's somewhere that we could take things like the forthcoming capability modeling and have a variant covering a topic like this and so on and so forth. It should be compatible with everything we do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's where my mind was going in a way. I think the education group is sort of very interested in using the capability model in a way to sort of provide educational material to help people, challenge deliver against particular sort of challenges. And AI, of course, is a huge one. So it'd be really good to sort of map this work into the capability model and produce maybe a kind of a heat map of how to which areas to focus on to implement um, uh, good practice AI management from the point of view of capabilities. Yeah, that would be a really interesting thing to do.
Yep, that sounds that sounds fantastic. And that's exactly what we should be doing. Building out, stacking things, using one solution to feed the other. Right. That's actually all we have for the Asia Sync call, but we do always have to ask, is there any other business? If not, then what we've covered is what they did in the workshop, which was reviewing the Scratchpad document and deciding this study group can become a work group and build a guide. Had a look at how Matthew, one of our co-chairs, wrote the proposal to the board about such a guide, and then had a look of how the board is going to talk about this next Monday in a condensed single slide. We should have news later this month about whether the work group is approved or not, and that means, all things being well, December's meeting will be the first of a work group actively saying we're building a guide. And, if things aren't well, we'll find out exactly why and what might be needed to be adjusted to make everyone happy in the future. Thank you very much for your time today and have a beautiful, well, I suppose weekend, or if you're traveling to the events in the US, at least a smooth flight.
Thank you. Have a nice day, weekend.
Yep, I'll reach out to you both directly, Ellen and Stephen, and let's catch up one to
Sure.
one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much,
Sure,
Shane.
thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.